Luke 9:28 to verses 36. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, John, and James, and went up to the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. His clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them. They were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They kept silent. And in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. May the Lord bless this reading of Scripture. Today is, in the church calendar, we were trying to decide how to label it. You know, we're having communion, so we call it Communion Sunday. We're still in the season of Epiphany, so it was the 8th week of Epiphany. Around the world, among people who follow lectionaries, it's Transfiguration Sunday. And if you have attended church very much at all, you have heard that story that I just read. It's in all 3 of the Synoptic Gospels. It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Which means that it's an old story. It's one of the older stories, and it's a story that was probably first written down by Mark, and then borrowed by Luke and Matthew. It's a story that was important, so important that it made all 3 of the books. I saw my first mountain in the early summer before my senior year in college. Can you believe that? I had never seen a mountain until then. Up until that point, I'd only lived in small hill towns in Mississippi. So I'd seen some hills, but no mountains. And then during my college years, I lived in a delta town. For those of you who don't know, the Mississippi Delta is in the Mississippi side of the delta. It's just a sort of an arc of land. One writer said it begins in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis and ends on Catfish Row in Vicksburg. It's not a very wide area, but it's a rich delta. It's a rich delta farming area. And so I went to college. I went to community college in the Delta, Mississippi Delta Community College. Then I went to Delta State University, a small liberal arts school in Bolivar County. Actually, it's in Cleveland, Mississippi. And so, you know, I used to think that the highest point in Bolivar County was probably Pitcher's Mounds. You know, it was such a flat area. So as I was moving into I was finished up my junior year and moving to my senior year, my campus minister invited me to go to Ridgecrest, North Carolina. At Ridgecrest, the Baptist have the Southern Baptists have this great conference center, and I was my campus minister was really excited about giving me this opportunity to see something that I hadn't seen and to experience this conference. And so we left the Delta. We drove to Jackson and picked up another campus minister in Jackson, and then another one in Meridian, Mississippi. And then we headed east, sort of northeast. And when the other campus ministers heard that I had never seen a mountain, it was like they were just so eager for me to see the mountains. You know, they wanted me to see a mountain. And so, you know, my expectation was pretty high. But, you know, so when we eventually, somewhere, I can't remember whether it was on this trip where it was like Stone Mountain just outside of Atlanta as we went through, or whether it was in Tennessee, or whether it was in North Carolina. Eventually, we went around the curve, and there they were. There was a range of mountains. And it was a sight to be seen. What I didn't realize is that you can see a mountain for a long time before you get to it. And so, you know, and eventually we actually got into the mountains. And it was a great experience for me at Ridgecrest that year. And as a campus minister later, I went back many years, many times to Ridgecrest, and many times to another conference center in New Mexico, the Baptist Ed, and saw many mountains. But okay, so this was, you know, though I thought about this as I was thinking about our sermon today, about the disciples and their mountain experience. You know, I even, at Ridgecrest, I even got to climb a mountain. It wasn't a huge mountain. It was basically just a trail going up. And, you know, I guess I hiked the mountain. How's that? It wasn't okay, better. And and it had this ominous name, a Rattlesnake Mountain. And it was an easy mountain to climb, to hike, and with the students that gathered there, many of them gathered, and you would weave your way through the woods, and it got steeper and steeper, and I was breathing heavy, and you know, there's a place where, you know, there are places where the trail is hard, a little bit hard to climb. You're reaching, you're holding on to trees as you pull up to the next level, and eventually you come out on the top, and there's this beautiful vista. You can look out across and see Montreat, the Presbyterian Conference Center. You can see Black Mountain, a little town there, and it's just beautiful. And though this was literally my first encounter with the mountain. Throughout my childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, I had tasted on occasion what I often referred to as mountaintop experiences. That's a term that, you know, that often is used to talk about spiritual encounters, you know, whether you're in the mountains or not. And a mountaintop experience is a religious experience that seems unique, it's serendipitous. It just sort of happens. You might be looking for it, you want it to happen, but it doesn't necessarily happen because you're looking for it. And sometimes these kind of experiences happen when you're not looking for it. They're aha experiences. Now, one of my definitions of worship is an aha experience. You know, so I hope that when we come together on Sundays and other times for worship, that we have that my prayer would be that all of us would have some kind of aha experience. And some of those experiences are bigger ones than others, and some are subtle and may in the moment seem very small, but then they become in reflecting on what was said and done and the experience that one had, one might discover that something that looked real small at one time has become very significant, life-changing even. The slight turn in the road that carried, you know, that might carry one in a new direction. And I had those. I've had those when in times of worship and times of prayer. I've had those with friends, with various ministers in my life, with family. My tradition of baptism is a very encounter kind of experience. And so in Sunday morning worship, the expectation would be that you would encounter God in some way. And so I would, and I can even remember back to some times when I had those kinds of encounters in worship. The chronology of the stories of the gospel is the chronology of the stories of the gospel is sort of hard to map out. You can read Luke, you can read Mark, and it's really difficult to sort of figure out that Jesus did this, that Jesus did that, and then he did this. Sometimes they're collections of stories, of events. Sometimes they're collections of sayings. Sometimes they're collections of miracles. And so it's hard to see a timeline. We don't know the timeline, all that had led up to this experience that John and Peter and James had with Jesus on the mountain. We don't know what they had seen before this. We don't know if they had. We know that there had been some miraculous kinds of things, because throughout Jesus' ministry, there were these miraculous kinds of things that were all about him, that he was involved with. He'd been a healer. He had brought these illuminating messages, and I was trying to think, who was it that these guys went up the mountain with? What made them eager to go up the mountain? What would make you eager to go up the mountain with Jesus? What would it be? Or would you be eager to go up the mountain with Jesus? But that, just the thought of that might cause one to pause, and might cause one to wonder about whether that would be a pleasant experience or not. Those of us that have been followers of Jesus for quite a while and have found him to be as God proclaimed, the chosen one, and he has been the chosen one who has chosen us. And for those of us that have experienced that, then the thought of an adventure going up the mountain might seem really, really cool. I think for Peter, James, and John, the invitation, they were, I don't know why the others were left behind. I don't know why they were chosen. But in the scriptures it says that Peter, James, and John were invited. I was looking at my favorite scholar, Marcus Ford. Okay, I was reading in Meeting Jesus Again for the first time, and he was describing what I think was how the disciples must have seen him. And one of the things that would characterize Jesus is that Jesus was a spirit person. Now, a spirit person, Borg says that sometimes scholars used to call them holy men. That Jesus was a person who had spirit, who's had eyes that had eyes to see and to hear, and encountered God in different ways. And there was this ability of Jesus to tune in to God, and his relationship was a personal one. It wasn't that he was just sort of gathering more information. It was that he was sort of following. He was following God. The other thing about Jesus, that he was a teacher of wisdom. He sort of used classical forms of wisdom speech, parables and memorial short sayings. He was a social prophet. He confronted the issues of his day, and he founded this movement. There were these people that were drawn to him. He had verbal gifts. His verbal gifts were remarkable. He used dramatic public actions, like not only did he talk about people being united and people being equal, he actually ate with people that society said were on different levels. The levels that society had set up in order to categorize people, Jesus had just rejected them, and he would do these things that would really challenge them. And he was also a remarkable healer, and he attracted followers, and even attracted them in such a powerful way that they left where they were and left what they were doing to follow him and be a part of his movement. He must have been intense. He was his life, the length of his ministry was relatively short. A few years in his 30s, he was young. And so there must have been this energy and vibrancy about him. And so when Jesus asked Peter and John, did you want to spend a day on the mountain? They probably said, do we? That would be great. Now, I don't know how they felt as they were climbing this 9,000-foot mountain. It was probably like Mount Hermon, which is the tallest mountain there. And I don't know how far up the mountain they went. He told them that they were going up to pray. And my guess, they had seen Jesus pray, and they had seen amazing things happen when Jesus prayed. And so there was probably an excitement that was building as they slowly went up the mountain. Eventually they stopped. Jesus went off to the side and began to pray. They were tired. I wondered if it was dusk, because this was going to be an overnight retreat. It turned out to be. So they looked over at Jesus where he was praying, and by golly, there were 3 people there. It wasn't just Jesus, but there were 2 others. And the scriptures don't tell us that Jesus said, "This is Moses. Moses meet Peter, James, and John. And this is Elijah." The scriptures just say they knew that it was Moses and Elijah that was with Jesus. And so Peter was really struck by that, of course. All of them were, but Peter spoke out and said, "Wow, we need to build some little houses, some little tabernacle type things here to commemorate this, because this is big stuff." And then there's a cloud that comes, and they hear the voice of God. And God says, "This is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him." Quite the experience. Quite the mountaintop experience. Peter wants to stay there and maintain it. They spend the night. The next day, they come down the mountain. There doesn't seem to be any kind of argument that goes on. Peter says, "Let's build tabernacles." Jesus says, "I don't think so." And then they come up down the mountain, and immediately they're thrown back into everyday experiences of everyday life. The encounter that I experienced at Ridgecrest, North Carolina, the takeaway for me were the mountaintop experiences that I did not have on the mountain. They were in the conference center. I still remember being in a conference led by a man named Nathan Porter. Nathan had grown up in Brazil, His parents were Baptist missionaries in Brazil. So Nathan had this, in addition to being this, what at that time seemed like a very young, interesting kind of speaker. You know, he was dynamic. He had this great Portuguese accent. You know, and some of the students, particularly the women, were sitting in the front drooling, I think. And there were stories told about Nathan how he was a good-looking guy, and they were told that at the conference center that people, the staff there would always do these kind of tricks. They would steal his towels and stuff like that. Okay, that was not the exciting thing that happened to me. That was just the thing I just remembered. But the thing that I remember about that conference, I think the theme of the conference, or the title, or the subject was friendship evangelism, was reaching across the line and sharing with others sharing the love of Christ with others. And Nathan worked for the Southern Baptist Convention. That's what he did. He was experimenting, exploring ways to do that. And so in the conference, this was in 1968. It had been a tragic year. Dr. Martin Luther King had been killed in April, and just before we drove to Ridgecrest, Bobby Kennedy had been killed. The South was still segregated. And Nathan Porter was talking about reaching across and inviting others. And I still remember him saying, and so why don't you bring your black friends? There were no African American people at this conference. Nathan suggested you bring your African American friends into the fellowship of your church. I had been moving in that direction for quite a while, being a son of the South, a person who was grown up where segregation was part of the air I breathed. And yet, suddenly it dawned on me, why not? Why not cross these lines? Now this seems so far, and almost, we're removed from this. I guess the thing that I just really want to point out is that in that conference, that conference, which probably lasted an hour, I came away, I experienced something. I experienced a word from God that I still remember to this day. A word of reconciliation, a word that called on me to cross lines. I guess in all that I really want to say today is that epiphanies happen all the time if we're open to it. And I guess I want to experience them and receive them. I want to take them in. I don't want to try to explain them away. I just want to hear the word that is coming to me through the experience. So today, a little later, we will have an experience together. We will share in what we call communion. Some churches call the Lord's Supper. And we will, in the breaking and the sharing of the bread and the sharing of the cups, we have opportunity to have a bit of an epiphany. And it may happen to us, it may not. Sometimes things are so routine that we don't see the same things that other people see. And sometimes we don't see the same things that other people see. is because they need to see something that is not necessarily what we need to see. And they don't see what we need to see because there's something we need to see that they don't need to see. All I'm saying is, let it be, let's experience it together. Amen.